Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today is my February reading wrap-up, so quick reviews of the 8 books I read this month, and I will also be reviewing them from the one I liked the least to the one I liked the most. And at the end of the video, my favorite book of February will go head-to-head with my favorite book from January, which was Spoiler Alert by Michael Osiello. So we will see if Spoiler Alert remains the best book of 2023 so far, or if my favorite February book beats out Spoiler Alert. However, before we get to that, I first wanted to talk about some of the movies I watched this month. So I've been catching up on Oscar nominees, and so I wanted to talk about 5 movies I watched. But if you are not interested in the movies, this is broken up into chapters down below so you can skip to the books. I will also have a timestamp on the screen telling you like when the book talk begins if you are not interested in the movies. So the first movie I watched was Tar, which is directed by Todd Field and of course stars Cate Blanchett. She has been nominated, all the award places nominated her for Best Actress in this role, which she's already won 2 Oscars, I think. So she's up for her 3rd Oscar, and she's amazing in this movie. And the movie too, it starts out, first of all, it's 2.5 hours. It's like 2 hours and 38 minutes, but I was glued to the screen the whole time. And it starts with 2 different scenes that are like dialogue heavy, because we begin with an interview where she's being interviewed, and then from there we move to this like business lunch meeting she is having with a colleague of hers. And so these 2 dialogue heavy scenes where she's talking about things like either musical terms or different people in the movie that we haven't even met yet, and just like she's talking about things that I don't even understand entirely, right? And yet I was just glued to the screen right from the start, and it was just so engrossing and so compelling, and it was incredible. I was thinking about this for days afterwards, and if you do not like a movie that spoon feeds you, you will love Tar, because nothing is spoon fed. A lot is up to just your own interpretation, and so it would be a great movie to watch with other people, because afterwards there is just so much to discuss about this book. And yeah, they're not telling you how you should feel about this character one way or the other. They just present you the facts, and they don't even always clearly give you the facts either. After you're done, you're still trying to piece things together. Yeah, it was just an incredible movie, so thought-provoking, and Cate Blanchett is incredible in this role. I mean, if Michelle Yeoh wins the Oscar, which she won the SAG, Michelle Yeoh did, which was cool. And if Michelle Yeoh wins the Oscar, I'm going to be happy, because she was great in Everything Everywhere All at Once. So whether it's Cate Blanchett or Michelle Yeoh, both of them were incredible. So yeah, Tar, highly, highly recommend. And then I watched The Fabelmans, which is directed by Steven Spielberg, and this is like his coming of age story about how he fell in love with filmmaking and about the drama that goes on with his parents as well. And the movie ends like when he's 19 years old, so we don't see him become the prolific director he has become by the end of this movie. But if you watch it knowing it's about Steven Spielberg, then in the end, you know how it ends, right? Because obviously he became super famous. And this one I did really like, and it is one I could see myself watching again for sure. And it is very inspiring, and seeing someone do something they love and seeing someone discover something they love and are passionate about it is very inspiring, and I loved it. And I thought the performances were incredible. My problem though is that he is it felt like he was trying to show how he struggled, because his father was always calling his movie making a hobby and didn't take it seriously. And then you have the drama going on with his parents, and then his family also moved a number of times. And so when they moved to California, that was a difficult move for him. But ultimately, he had a great childhood. His dad was making good money. And even if his dad called his filmmaking a hobby, his dad still bought him all these cameras and fancy editing equipment and supported him in making these films and was helping out. And then his mom, despite the drama between his parents and his mom being a bit neurotic at times, she was still a very good parent. Both of his parents were still great parents. And so ultimately you lived a really privileged life, it seems. So it's no surprise you got to fulfill your dream, because you had a lot of things working for you, right? So it wasn't inspirational in that he had to overcome these intense odds. He just had to overcome normal odds, I guess, right? Anyway, I enjoyed it. I liked it. I would recommend it. But it seems like he's trying to act like he had a harder time than he really did. And when they moved to California, they show up at this rental house because the house they bought is still being built. And they show up to the rental house and they're like, well, this is a dump. But the house was totally fine. so what's wrong with the house? It looked perfectly nice and you're acting like it's not good enough. Like, anyway, ultimately, I still like this movie and I would recommend it. Paul Dano and Michelle Williams are nominated for, Best Supporting Actor and Actress. I don't think either of them will win. It's also nominated for Best Picture, but I don't think it'll win that either. But anyway, I liked it. Moving on to Aftersun. This one is nominated, Paul Mescal is nominated for Best Actor, and that is the only nomination it got. Like, it should have gotten Best Screenplay or something, because this movie was incredible. And after I finished watching it, also, it's the debut movie of director Charlotte Wells, so very impressive. But after watching this movie, I really, really liked it. But it wasn't until after watching the Oscar experts video on this where he talks about why it is a masterpiece. After I watched that video he made, it gave me a whole new appreciation for this movie, and I gave it 5 stars. It is beautiful. It is not one that spoon feeds you the story, so you have to think about it and just let it sit with you. And very thoughtful and very symbolic. Paul Mescal, of course, is incredible, but also the girl who plays the 11-year-old, Frankie Corio, I think is the name of the 11-year-old actor, and she was amazing. I was very impressed. So this felt very real, very genuine, very beautiful. It's very sad, but I would highly recommend it. And then The Triangle of Sadness by Ruben Östlund. So this movie was awesome and I loved it, and I'm going to be watching more of Ruben Östlund's movies next month. The Square, I'm very excited to watch. I also am going to watch Force Majeure and compare it with Downhill, the movie with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Will Ferrell. So I'm going to do an original versus remake. But anyway, Triangle of Sadness, though, was incredible. It is a wild ride, which, by the way, I do not watch trailers for movies that I know I want to see, so I had not seen a trailer for any of these. And so I still haven't watched a Triangle of Sadness trailer. I don't know how much it gives away, but I would just say if you're going to watch this movie, avoid the trailers, because it was amazing going into this knowing absolutely nothing, because everything that happens, you're just like, oh my gosh, like, what? And it goes in some crazy directions that I had not expected. And we have amazing performances. And it's divided into 3 parts. We do have our main 2 characters. Her character's name is Yaya. I forget the guy's name. It's a guy who was in Where the Crawdads Sing, actually. He's in this movie. But anyway, so the 2 of them are like the main characters. But in the 3rd part, we kind of see like this whole other cast of characters, including Woody Harrelson. And so even though we have those main 2 cast members, so many other people have their moments to shine depending on what part of the movie you're in. Yeah, I loved this movie. It is pretty wild. It is very on the nose. This is not subtle at all. Like, you clearly see what they're going for here. And I'll admit that maybe at times it was a bit too obvious and a bit too spot on, and it was like, okay, like, there's no subtlety. But regardless, I still enjoyed it, and not everything needs to be subtle, right? I don't mind an obvious message at times. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I would highly recommend it. It is nominated for Best Picture, and it won Best Picture, the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. So I don't think it'll win Best Picture at the Oscars, but this is a Cannes winner, so that was cool. If it does win Best Picture, that would be like a crazy upset, but I mean, I'm rooting Everything Everywhere all at once. I'm rooting for that one to win Best Picture, but if Triangle of Sadness won, I would still be upset about Everything Everywhere not winning, but at the same time, I did really like Triangle of Sadness, so I wouldn't be too upset if it beat out Everything Everywhere. But ultimately, Everything Everywhere is what I'm rooting for. Anyway, the last movie I watched this month is The Whale. This one, of course, is directed by Darren Aronofsky, and it stars Brendan Fraser in his comeback role. This was my least favorite movie that I watched this month. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. It didn't feel genuine, and that's ironic because like being honest and the truth is like a key part of this movie. It's a big theme, and yet the movie itself just didn't feel genuine. And some of the roles, I mean, Brendan Fraser is amazing, and for the most part, all of the acting is really, really good. The Sadie Sink character, though, you're not supposed to like her character, but I just didn't, I don't know, I wasn't drawn to the relationship between her and Brendan Fraser's character. And she just didn't feel real. Like, she felt like a caricature, kind of, which she does play a teenager who's going through all of these emotions, and sometimes someone who wants to appear really mean and, they put up this front. Sometimes it is over the top because they are not being genuine. They're hiding their true selves, right? So in that sense, I guess it's fitting for her character, but the best part, I think, was the scenes between Brendan Fraser, Charlie, and his nurse/friend Liz. I forget the actor's name, but she was incredible, and I loved their relationship. And And there is a lot to think about here with the story, specifically with Liz and Charlie, I would say in particular. But we also have this missionary kid from like this church called New Life that's in town, and his character, stuff going on with him, I wasn't a big fan of. There was just a lot with this movie that just wasn't resonating with me, and it just felt too staged, I guess. And the emotional parts, like Charlie holding on to the belief in the good of people. I'm all for that message, right? Like, I like believing the best of someone. Even when they've given me evidence to show that I should maybe think the worst of them, I still try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I'm always wanting to believe in the best of people, right? So I like that message a lot, but I just wasn't feeling it with this character, and it almost felt like he was being delusional or something, which maybe he was, because he's near the end of his life and he's wanting to believe that this person is good, even when it's clear they're not. But yeah, ultimately it was just kind of annoying at times. But yeah, so this one was my least favorite of the bunch. And I don't know if I would recommend it. I guess if you want to see Brendan Fraser's, comeback role, then it's worth watching for that. And I do think it's cool he got nominated. He won the SAG award. Austin Butler has won the Golden Globe and he won the BAFTA, but Brendan Fraser won the SAG. So I am very curious to see which of them two will win the Oscar. I am tempted to say it's probably going to be Austin Butler, but who knows? He won the SAG, so maybe Fraser will end up winning the Oscar after all. It's hard to say. But anyway, so those are the 5 movies I watched this month. I gave 5 stars to Tar and Aftersun. The Fabelmans was 4 stars. Triangle of Sadness, I think that was like 4 stars as well, maybe 4.5. And then The Whale, I gave 2.5, which, by the way, if you want to follow me on Letterboxd or Goodreads, they are ranked down below. Okay, and now time to get into the books. So my least favorite book of the month was The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. She is the same author who wrote In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which I have not read. And this one, while there are things about it that I liked, overall, I didn't like it. It's my least favorite book of the month after all. But it is about this woman who, her friend from college dies. And so she reconnects with this guy she had known in high school because he has this true crime podcast. So she reconnects with him to look into the death of this college friend of hers. And she is like 30. So it's been a while since she had even seen that friend. And then they go down this rabbit hole of just this like sexist cult that exists in this town that she had been part of when she was in college. And ultimately, it's supposed to be like an empowering book for women, but there's just so much like abuse towards the women in this book and so much manipulation and gaslighting and violence that it kind of ruined any empowering aspect to it. And some people might say that it's not that bad because the writer doesn't always push things as far, she kind of holds back at times, I guess you could say, but she pushed it far enough for me that I just didn't like it. And I feel like she also uses certain things that she knows are going to get people fired up. So it seems like a cheap shot, right? Oh, of course, this is going to be an aspect of the book because that is something that is going to get people feeling riled up. And you want a book that makes you feel things, right? And so I feel like she uses topics that of course made me feel things, but it seemed like a cheap shot and it was too obviously manipulative, trying to get me to feel a certain way, I think. So it wasn't very tactful in my mind. But something she talks about that I do really agree with is there's a part where one of the characters is saying, with adults, as long as everyone is consenting adults, then what people do is fine, as long as everyone consents. But she brings up the fact that it is not that simple, right? It is not so black and white as giving consent or not giving consent, because someone can give consent, but if they're being brainwashed or manipulated or something, they're giving consent, but it doesn't really count because they are still being manipulated. And so it goes into that, which I thought was really interesting and really well put. But yeah, this one, it was a quick read because it's like a mystery thriller and I was wanting to know what the deal was. But at the end of the day, I also did like the ending, certain aspects of the ending. But yeah, ultimately it was just too much upsetting topics in it that I did not enjoy reading about. And so yeah, it's not one I would personally recommend. I guess some people might like it though, but anyway. The next 2 books I'm kind of going to talk about together, and that is The Gods of Mars and The Warlord of Mars, which this is book 2 and 3 of the Mars Trilogy by Edgar Rice Burroughs. The first book being A Princess of Mars, which was adapted into John Carter. My book versus movie came out a couple weeks ago, or last week. Anyway, I really enjoyed the first book. And I think I would have enjoyed these 2 more if I had spread them out. But because I did them back to back, sci-fi fantasy, specifically fantasy, is not my favorite genre. And so reading A Princess of Mars, I enjoyed it because it was the first fantasy I've read in a while. I ended up reading the next 2 books soon after, and I feel like it was just too much fantasy for me. I should have spread these out and I think I would have enjoyed them, but because I read them back to back, I was just tired of the fantasy genre and wanted to be done with it ultimately. Having said that, I like the third one better than the second, but that's partly because the second has just some weird racial stuff that goes on in that one that I didn't enjoy reading about. But I think if you enjoy fantasy, sci-fi fantasy, I think you should read at least A Princess of Mars. And then if you enjoy that, why not read the second too, right? Because they are such a huge part of the sci-fi fantasy culture, because these were written in the early 1900s before so many other books were. And so many books were inspired by these books by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I talk about these books even more in depth on Patreon, because that was the topic of my February Patreon video, was my thoughts on these two books. So if you become a Patreon, you can watch the video where I talk about these two books. But the next book is Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun. This is the third book in the Finlay Donovan series. So I read the first two books in January and I enjoyed them. I liked the first one better than the second, but I actually liked the third one better than the second as well. So the second book was my least favorite. But the third one I liked because she switches up the setting. So, which by the way, if you don't know the first Finlay book, Finlay is an author who is mistaken for an assassin, a contract killer. And so this lady hires her to kill her husband. And then this just leads down a crazy path of, like murder and gangsters and mobsters and Russian spies and cops and all of this stuff. And so the third book is just continuing down that route, but we switch up the scene because she and Vero go to this police academy for a week. And it is while they're at this police academy that things are happening. And so I really enjoy that. The first two books were just in her home, just living normal life. And so having the third book be in a different location really helped switch things up, because the vibe of the book is very similar to the first two. And, it's very familiar, but it's not too tiresome because it's in a different location. So if you've read the first two Finlay books, I would recommend this one as well. And then we have A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. So last month I read The Cabin at the End of the World, which I didn't love. Ink to Film talked about this. They did a book versus movie. And in their book episode, what they said about the book did help me like the book more than I originally had, but I still wasn't crazy about it. However, A Head Full of Ghosts, I've heard nothing but good things about. So I decided to read that one this month. And yeah, I really like this one a lot, so the theme of this book, deals with exorcism and things. And so that is not something I read or watch, and I purposefully stay away from that, especially in like the stereotypical sense, which this book does have a lot of stereotypical scenes when you think of possessions and things like that. Which, The Shining right here, that's like kind of a guy who's possessed, but it's different enough that one doesn't like get to me the way ones like Head Full of Ghosts does, because this one really creeped me out and it was pretty disturbing at times. So I will say that. And there was one scene in particular that would definitely come to haunt me at nighttime. And so even though it has some stereotypical aspects to it, reminiscent of like the movie The Exorcist, for example. So even though it has some things that are like familiar in that sense, it ends up going down a different route that kind of turns the whole stereotypical story on its head, right? And it does give you a lot to think about as well. And so ultimately, I really liked it. If you do not like horror or scary stuff, I would say you should probably pass, because it was pretty scary for me to read. And the scene that I keep thinking of is when they're at the dinner table, and that part where she's like, I can do voices too. I still am creeped out when I think about that scene. So part of me like regrets reading it because it freaked me out, but in some ways I'm glad I read it because this is the Paul Tremblay book most people talk about. So it is very well done, but be warned that it is creepy and upsetting at times. And if this became a movie, I don't think I would watch it, because this is one of those where if it became a movie, it would be too scary for me. But the next three books were all incredible, and I had a hard time knowing what order to put them in, but I'm going to say that number 3 is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I love John Steinbeck so much, and Of Mice and Men was fantastic. Yes, it is very sad, and yes, it is very hopeless, but it is so well done, and so much symbolism, and so much to think about, and so many details. And John Steinbeck, I say this in my book versus movie, but he just puts so much care into his books, right? Like he puts so much thought into these characters and into what is happening, and he's just an amazing writer. And so I loved this book. And my book versus movie comes out in like 2 weeks, I believe. 2-3 weeks, I forget now. But the second book on the list is Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. This one is like a suburban drama. A married couple have been married for 7 years and they are kind of in a rut. And so the wife comes up with this idea which helps rejuvenate their life and their love for each other. But things happen. And so basically there's just a lot of drama. And this book was fantastic. I love it so, so much. I had read this book and watched the movie back in 2008. And all these years later, like 15 years later or something, so much of it is just ingrained in my mind. And so returning to it, there was a lot, I already knew what was going to happen and I remembered so many details. And yet even so, I just loved reading this book again. And I would highly, highly recommend it. Again, it gives you so much to think about. The character development is fantastic. And I feel like there's things that are definitely very relatable, especially, as someone who is in my early 30s, there were just things I could relate to, both as the issues going on between April and Frank, but also just individually what they were dealing with. There were certain things on both sides that I was like, yeah, I can relate to that to an extent. But even if I couldn't relate, it's still just a fantastic story. It's so simple, on the onset, it's a very simple premise, but there's just so much depth to this book. Highly, highly recommend. I absolutely loved it. Which I'm trying to decide if this one deserves to be number one or if it's Me by Elton John, which I have right there. It is his memoir, and I loved it so much. It was fantastic. It was vulnerable and honest and funny and entertaining and inspiring. And so I just had such a great time reading his book, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for him as a person. And I just learned so much about him too, because I just didn't know that much. My book versus movie for that, where I compare it to Rocket Man, came out yesterday, so you should definitely check that out. But yeah, this memoir was fantastic. In my notes, I put this one as the best book of February, but Revolutionary Road, it is a close call with those two, but I guess I will keep Me at number one. But when it comes to Me versus Spoiler Alert, which is funny, both of these are memoirs, I think I will still say that Spoiler Alert wins, which I gave Me 4 or 4.5 stars, whereas Spoiler Alert I gave 5. So far that is the only 5-star book of the year. Like I said in my last video, I'm trying to be more selective in what I give 5 stars to, but even Revolutionary Road, does that one just deserve 5 stars? Because I loved that book. And Me, incredible. Even though I only gave it 4.5, part of me is like, should I just give it 5? Why not? Anyway, all three of those books are amazing, but when it comes down to which one is the best book of the year, Spoiler Alert again was one that I was going to call them characters, but they're real people. But the people in it I felt so connected to them, and he really draws you in and paints such a great picture. And he is so honest and vulnerable, which is so important when you're writing a memoir, right? While also being really funny, while also just being so tragic, and also just something that just really struck me and is one that I still think back on, because there were just so many beautiful, poignant passages in this book, and there was a lot of humor too, so it was the perfect mix. So I'm still gonna say Spoiler Alert wins. That book is fantastic. You should definitely read it. It's also a great audiobook. The movie with Jim Parsons and Ben Aldridge, I would also highly recommend. I think you should watch the movie first and then read the book. That way you will have a positive movie watching experience, because I read the book first, and then when I went to go see the movie, I was like, oh, this isn't as good as the book was. But if I had watched it before reading the book, I would have loved the movie. And then I would have read the book and I would have loved the book, But because I did the reverse, I was a bit too critical of the movie at times. Anyway, that wraps it up for my February reading wrap up. I believe that was all 8 books. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. And the 5 movies I watched. So comment down below what movie you think will win Best Picture. Comment down below what the best book you read this month was. Comment down below what your least favorite book for this month was. And who do you think will win Best Actress, Cate Blanchett or Michelle Yeoh? Like I said, I'm happy regardless who wins. I didn't talk about Everything Everywhere because I've already seen that. I also already saw Elvis. I've already seen Banshees of Inisherin. I guess those are the big ones unless I'm forgetting one. I still need to watch Top Gun, but honestly, that's a low priority. I don't really have much interest in watching it. I'm sure it's good, but anyway, All Quiet on the Western Front, by the way, swept the BAFTAs, won so many awards. So if you have not watched my book versus movie for that, you definitely should. My brother came on for that one, and he's in the military, and we just had a great discussion about All Quiet on the Western Front. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment your thoughts down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.